Very good morning to all of you. We've been talking about the essay by Dipe Chakrabarti, Subaltern Studies in Retrospect and Reminiscence. So far, we understood Professor Chakrabarti's intention behind writing these particular article or essay through his preparatory note that we understood. At the same time, he looks back at their history, at the history of the development of subaltern studies, and then he talks about the generative errors. So we were in the last part of this particular section. I mean to say, not essay. In this section, he talks about different what we call different kind of, let me come to the point, uh, generative mistakes, and then he categorizes them, organizes them, the two sub themes: the archaic in the modern and the subject of history. These are the two sub themes that he refers to. Of course, there is an exhaustive list of possible sub-themes, he says, but he focuses only on the two sub-themes, the archaic in the modern and the subject of history. And apart from that, he refers to other sub-themes, but he does not elaborate them or explore them. He refers to the sub-themes like the religious and the political, or the problem of representing the subaltern, or the problem of the archives, and so on. In this particular lecture, I shall focus on the next section, the sub-theme of the archaic in the modern. So, first of all, he states the problem here. He gives an anecdote. Means he talks about the problem anecdotally. Anecdotally means giving an example to explain something. An anecdote is literary term, and I'm sure you're familiar with. You studied it last year. So he gives an example, an illustration to explain his point, and in South Asian terms, means he give this example in the context of South Asia. So he expresses his intention to, first of all, explain his point with the help of the example, with the help of an illustration. At the same time, to restrict himself to South Asia, and then he moves on to some general considerations. So, South Asia is the subcontinent. Okay, it is the Marathi term for subcontinent is Upakhanda and Bharatiya Upakhanda we say. So the subcontinent is one part of the world where everyday life is marked by cohabitation. He is referring to the Indian subcontinent or South Asia in general, we can say. And this South Asian region is one part of the world where everyday life is marked by cohabitation. Cohabitation means living together of different religious, linguistic groups, cultural groups, and intermingling of practices and objects that look ancient and modern. So there is a kind of mixing together or intermingling of what practices. Practices means the customs, the rituals, or other aspects that we follow in a day-to-day life, and the objects related to these practices, which may look ancient and modern. So they are mixed together. He explains this point with the help of an example that he experienced as a child, a lathe machine. Now, you are familiar with the machine. A lathe machine is a kind of machine which is used to shape metal or wooden objects. It is an engineering device, you might be knowing that. So, a lathe machine is a mechanical equipment. It is the example of the modern world. Lathe machine is the recent innovation. Then what he says, a lathe machine being carried for delivery on a bullock cart. So you can understand, or a push cart. Now, when you look at these two things, a lathe machine is a modern object, whereas a bullock cart represents the old generation, old age, the ancient age. So, bullock cart has been there from ancient times, or push cart. Push cart means, while knowing, you must have seen the marketplaces, the coolies, etc., push their carts, dakalgada. So, a lathe machine being carried for delivery on a bullock cart or push cart was an uncommon sight. Means that was not an uncommon. I'm sorry for that. Not an uncommon. He says it was very common scenario in the Calcutta I grew up in. So noticed, he looked at this particular combination of the modern and ancient, and he gives an example of a lathe machine being carried for delivery on a bullock cart or a push cart. And that wasn't a very uncommon thing, that was a very common thing, common sight. In the Calcutta he grew up in. So this is one of the examples. Then he says, or if technology has indeed made a difference in such sites. Now these days we use auto rickshaw or some kind of tempo, etc. Think of how ubiquitous. Ubiquitous means again uncommon, commonly found, not uncommon, commonly found, which is commonly seen. How ubiquitous the representation of Puranic, or that matter, for that matter, Quranic themes are in everyday life. So in our everyday life, we come across Puranic. Puran is related to Hinduism, Hindu mythologies, and Quranic is related to Islam. So in everyday life, these Puranic or Quranic themes are found. Again, he illustrates this point by giving a common Calcutta example, a very common Calcutta example. Because we are familiar with these, for reasons of familiarity. Think of getting into any public vehicle, a taxi, a bus, or into what they call a minibus. So at our place we have ST bus now. For last more than 1 month, we haven't been able to travel by ST bus, or else other public vehicles such as Kadi Duli, etc. We call it. Okay, so a taxi, a bus, or into what we call a luxury bus, travel bus, or a mini bus. In Calcutta, he is referring to office period. You'll find pictures hung around the driver's seat. Okay, so even at our place, not in state transport buses, it is very common, but in private buses, it is very common, or private vehicles. There you come across pictures hung around the driver's seat that put historical figures. So historical figures, then he refers to the example of Ramakrishna Parahams, Saint Ramakrishna. Okay, or in the context of Maharashtra, you can take the example of Saint Tukaram, Naneshwar, etc. Or Vivekanand, we often see at the public places. And the image of a Puranic goddess like Kali in the same frame. So the frame of Ramakrishna and Kali in Calcutta is referring to. And here, in our case, you may come across the frame of Mauli, Dhaneshwar, and Lord Vittala. Okay, so the image of a Puranic goddess like Kali in the same frame, or maybe the picture of a Sufi shrine. If the person is a follower of Islam, a Muslim person may put some, picture of a Sufi shrine and a folk religious saint. For example, Ajmer, or other places, you may say. So such places or the religious saint framed together. In the case of Hindu driver, you will come across the image of Puranic goddess and the saint, and in case of the Muslim person, you may come across a Sufi shrine and a folk religious, a common saint whom the people, what we call, have some kind of devoted towards whom there is a devotion. So such kind of frames were very common. So why is he giving this example? It says, in other words, putting humans and gods in the same field of vision is a part of popular practices in India. So Puranic gods and humans. For example, Naneshwar in our case was a human being. He was a saint who lived in Maharashtra during 12th and 13th century. Okay, and then Lord Vithala is believed to be the Puranic avatar of Lord Vishnu. This means man and God, humans and gods together. So that has been a popular practice in India. And this is an everyday phenomenon. A phenomenon is a remarkable thing. And as Gohen says, actually the name we came across, I in the beginning of this essay I had mentioned something about Hiren Goren. It's not Goren, it's Gohen. The spelling mistake has occurred over there. So it is Gohen. Gohen was one of the Assami, thinker of the contemporary period itself, in the Southeast period, Ranjit Guha and then Pata Chatterjee, etc. He belonged to Assam, Gohen. So Hiren Gohen says this kind of thing is hardly news, nothing new in it. It cannot become a news at all. That was a very common practice in India. This is an everyday phenomenon, but that does not mean we have satisfactory explanations for it. Although it is everyday practice, everyday phenomenon, but we do not have an explanation which satisfies our intellectual mind. We always have a question in our mind. The question that we always face is, how should we think about this phenomenon analytically? Phenomenon is the singular form and phenomena is the plural form. A remarkable thing. Then how should one analyze this scenario, this situation? That's what he asks here. Means what should be the method of analysis? How should we understand this particular remarkable thing? Then he said the problem in turn poses many questions about religion. Then he intends to talk about them after some time. So, whatever observations that he puts forth here, he thinks the problem in turn poses many questions about religion, historical time, about belief, and its relationship to practices, about elite and folk religion, and so on. The question that he arises in our mind, which is not satisfactorily explained, poses many questions again. It poses questions about religion. It poses questions about historical time, about belief, and even its relationship to practices, even about elite and folk religion, and so on. Several questions. Then he says historians. Dipesh Chakrabarti himself was a historian. Ranjit Guha was a historian. Even Partha Chatterjee was a historian. So historians often deal with the problem by speaking of change and continuity, though we seldom know why certain things change while others just continue to be. Means we talk about change. Means they try to deal with these problems by speaking of change and even continuity. But again, there's a problem. We seldom know, means historians seldom know why certain things change, while others just continue to be. Then he comes to the Indian history. In Indian history, the subject existed until the coming of subaltern studies. So we know subaltern studies started with Ranjit Guha and the members who joined this particular collective activity, the project. Before that, in Indian history, the subject existed until the coming of subaltern studies. We had parceled life out into a neat division of labor. Before, means there was a division of labor, means the division of society was according to the labor. So we talk about Bara, Balutidar, Alutidar, etc. So what we did, we left matters religious or ancient to Indologists earlier, before subaltern studies. Whatever religious matters or ancient matters were there, they were being understood, studied by Indologists. You know now the term. Indologists are the experts who deal with the history of India or South Asia. They talk about history, culture, customs, etc. Then, this particular understanding, study of the religious or ancient matters was supposed to be the concern of Indiologists or historians of ancient India. Then, matters that required the historian to know Persian or Arabic fell into the province of the so-called medievalists. Means the matters related to Persian or Arabic history were considered to be the concern of the medievalists, those who are concerned with the study of Middle Ages. So he mentions here the terrific work that Kathleen Davis, a medievalist, has done on the whole question of periodization. So Indologists deal with ancient and religious matters. Medievalists deal with the Persian or Arabic, and then things pertaining to the period of British rule and after fail to the historian of modern India. And the modern historians of modern India deal with British rule and whatever happened after that. So this is the periodization. While understanding the development of Indian English literature, you must have studied this periodization with reference to Makarand Paranjape's book, with reference to MK Naik, etc. You must have studied this periodization, post-colonial, pre-colonial, etc. Colonial, then post-colonial period literature. Okay, we talk about Henry Delogio. We talk about the contributors to English literature, and then we talk about the period of means pre-independence period, wherein we talk about Vivekanand, Rabindranath Tagore, Sarojini Naidu, etc. So that is a kind of periodization. That is, there is no such strict periodization as such. Therefore, Paranjape, after reviewing the periodization, comes up with a different kind of periodization. I'm not concerned with Indian literature here. I'm concerned with what we call the historical division that Dipesh Chakrabarti is referring to. So he talks about three kind of divisions. The work of the Indologists and historians of ancient India was to study the matters related to religion and ancient India. Then, whatever occurred during the invention of Mughals, Persian and Arabic happenings, events were to be handled by the medievalists, and then the modern historians of modern India were supposed to deal with the period of British rule and what happened afterwards. So this is the division of labor that he's referring to. Then he says, as a young Indian and a student of Indian history, I was aware. He's talking about his own experience. As I could not be any otherwise. Of course, Miss. that was bound to be the part and parcel of the life that he led. Therefore, says, even if didn't wish, I was aware, okay, of gods and goddesses. For example, you people grow up in such a surrounding that you come to know about gods and goddesses, or even of seemingly ancient practices and sentiments that were part of my Indian life. So, as a young student, as a young Indian, he was very much familiar of gods and goddesses, ancient practices, sentiments, which were part of his Indian life. But what he says, this was not something for which I could make room in my work. Yes, that was the part of my residue. Yes, these are the common memories or leftovers that modernization, literature, including Marxism, made readily available. So what he says in my, I am not supposed to talk about these sentiments, these practices. They were the part of the residues of every Indian, we can say. But the mismatch between life, as described in probing history and life, as lived remains stark. Okay, means there is a kind of mismatch between life and reality. Okay, means what I experienced and what I studied were two different things. There was a kind of mismatch in it. And he refers to D.D. Kosambi. He was a mathematician. Kosambi was from Pune. So his pioneering creative and what you call learned attempts to answer this question. Okay, this kind of mismatch. And he did produce, his answers did produce the language of residues and leftovers. Means whatever memories have been there, they are still the part of our lives during the period of modernization. Okay, he's referring to the work of D.D. Kosambi regarding residue. I'll tell you the name of D.D. Kosambi just a minute. Give me a minute, please. He was the Indian mathematician. I refer to that. Damodar Dharmananda Kosambi was his full name. Actually, he was born in Goa and he died in Pune. And he is well known for his views on religion. Okay, his contribution to Indian historiography are well known. So he's talking about Indian historiography. He has talked about these things. He talks about the language of residues and leftovers, and that was suitable to or adequate for his times. But it did not work as well for us, he says. Whatever ideas, whatever things have been presented by Kosambi worked well for his time. Kosambi was born in the year 1907 and he died in 1966. So, whatever work he did that was suitable, that was adequate for his times. But when it comes to us, he says, the period that he belonged, Goa, uh, he couldn't get satisfactory answers to the question that he had in his mind. Then he refers to his first experience of meeting to Ranjit Guha, and that experience gave him a kind of a jolt on this very particular problem. Means he was not satisfied. The question was there, in his residue all the time, in his memory. Means he didn't couldn't find the exact and satisfactory solution to the problem. The question answer to the question that he had in his mind, and when he met Guha, then times some kind of inspiration he got. Ranjit Guha had invited him to spend a weekend with him at Sussex in the year 1979. That was the part of the subaltern studies project. He wanted to introduce Dipesh Chakrabarti to the beginning of subaltern studies project. So, as a part of this particular activity, he had invited Dipesh Chakrabarti to Sussex at Sussex to spend a time, weekends, Saturday and Sunday with him. And he read out to me a draft of what later became Chapter 2 of Elementary Aspects of Peasant Insurgency in Colonial India. Now, this is the book, name of the book that he's referring to. And the discussion that he had with Ranjit Guha became the Chapter 2 of the book, which was published in the year 1983, Elementary Aspects of Peasant Insurgency in Colonial India. Okay, so he's referring to that. So during this particular visit uh, to Ranjit Guha, he started thinking over this question. Okay, so that's what we understood. Insurgency means udhav, that's what we say in Marathi. So when he discussed these things with Ranjit Guha, he was amazed to find that he was relating oppressive acts. Who? Ranjit Guha was relating oppressive acts. The acts which were means the uh, acts passed by British government to oppress, to suppress the insurgency of farmers and other people. उठाव जे आहे किंवा बंड जे आहे ते त्याचं दमन करण्यासाठी ते दाबण्यासाठी जे कायदे करत आहे त्याबद्दल अँड आयडिओलॉजीज ऑफ रूरल लँडलॉर्ड्स vis a vis is a it is a French word in relation to, that means in relation to. Vis a vis means in relation to is the French word. So whatever acts and ideologies of rural landlords means in relation to the peasantry in the 19th century colonial India. Means many different acts were being passed, different ideologies were put forth by zamindars, landlords means watandars, etc. So they were being opposed by the peasant class, the small farmers, peasantry in the 19th century colonial India during the British rule. Now to India, to a now famous text of the ancient sage Manu, or the Manu Samhita, or the Manusmruti we say. Okay, so there was a kind of opposition to Manusmruti. Manu was the ancient sage, and what a book written by him is titled in Marathi as Manusmruti, and in Bengali they call it Manu Samhita. So there was an opposition to this text. Even Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar and his followers, they opposed Manusmruti, probably composed around the beginning of or just before the Christian era. This particular book must have been composed. It's a poetic work in which it talks about the caste system and the social division and all, division of society. So it must have been composed around the beginning of just before the Christian era. And first scholars who worked on the colonial period seldom used Sanskrit text. The first thing, scholars, I'm sorry for that lack of pause. First, he says, scholars who worked on the colonial period seldom used Sanskrit text. They didn't use Sanskrit text. The scholars who worked on colonial period initially. But more importantly, I wondered how a historian could relate 19th century practices and ideologies to ideologies separated by thousands of years. Manusmriti was composed before thousands of years. And Dipesh Chakrabarti was wondering how one could relate 19th century practices, the practices in 19th century, and ideologies to the ideologies separated by thousands of years. That was a matter of wonder for Divya Chakravarti. And on the other hand, I had this strange feeling. He had this feeling that these ideologies of hierarchy and domination. You know, in Manusmriti, there is an ideology of hierarchy. Means Brahmin, the what we call the what is that system we call Chaturvarnya. Varna is presented. Means Brahmin, then Kshatriya, then Vaishya, and then Shudra. This is the hierarchy. And the Brahmins were higher, at the higher rank in this hierarchy. So dominion depended on that. So these ideologies of hierarchy and dominion, however separated by they may have been from my times in their historical origins, were not at all unfamiliar to me. Although these ideologies were there before thousands of years, still now even today we are familiar to we are familiar to this system. We experience this hierarchy and dominion. Our caste system is so predominant. So he says, I was already aware that I had been brought up in a society, you people too must have experienced it, in which they were valued this ideology, these ideologies of hierarchy and dominion, or domination, I'm sorry. So domination of a particular caste group, a particular group of people, is still under practice, and you are still familiar to that system. It's even after thousands of years. And he is talking about his own experience as a Bengali person, what happened in Bengal. So that even the 19th century of Kuha description melted away before my mind's eye and blended with the India I knew from experience. First of all, he wondered how could a scholar, a historian, correlate the happenings in 19th century to the happenings, ideologies of the what you call pre-Christian era, the thousand before, which something which happened before thousands of years. But when he started thinking about his own experiences, he thought that okay, this description melted away before my mind's eye and blended with the India I knew from experience. So this is what he tried to understand. Means the correlation between the history and what we call the life that he lived, the experiences that he himself, went through, underwent, and it left me wondering about this method. Therefore, he started thinking about this analytical method, the correlation of the happenings in 19th century and the system ideologies which were there before thousands of years. So that's what made him to think about this method.